Good morning. Welcome to today's webinar. This morning we'll be covering the template design basics, actually a little bit more than basics, kind of advanced. And this is in follow-up to the two previous template design webinars that were performed and recorded late last year, 2014. So I kind of wanted to go through a review of what we've covered. I didn't want to go through details, but anything that's sort of grayed out here is things that we've covered. And what we had left in the last webinar were some of the development steps and some of the questions. So we had gone through all the best practices, and you can go ahead and review the posted webinars for all the detail on these. The development steps we had gone through. We were developing the median conditions and basic end conditions. What we didn't get to were some of the special end conditions, intersection behavior controls, adding crossover behavior controls, and then I wanted to show some more of the, or at least explain some of the horizontal feature controls and the ranges for those. We did talk about testing point controls within the template dialog, but I'll be showing some of that this morning as well. And we also talked about the super elevation and vector offsets as far as the where to control them on our template library. So let me just get into a session here. And what I want to focus in this morning on is a couple of things. And in our template library here, we had last added in some end conditions to the outside of our template. And let me turn off the display points. And the last session, I showed you how you could go ahead and add in these variable median components and set the constraint values. And then when you get into the actual corridor, you're going to set a parametric constraint which will zero these out and put them at their normal location in the template. But I wanted to focus in a little bit on the outside conditions. And when you have variable outside conditions, there's really three ways that you can handle the outside conditions. Well, maybe even more than that. You could build separate templates. Like you could copy this particular template and then essentially scratch out this type of end condition. Maybe you had to put a shoulder in here with a ditch and tie back to the right-of-way line or something like that for a portion of your corridor. You know, I wouldn't recommend creating multiple templates that just have varying end conditions. What I would recommend, and what we sort of use in the training, is that you build the different types of end conditions as what we call component sets. So like, for example, these we pulled over from the FDOT template library, which are standard, what we call linear templates, but they could be modified to basically be other types of end conditions. So for example, let's say we were talking about the shoulder one, and let's say that I've got a part of my corridor that's going to need shoulder. So one thing I could do is actually add it to the template as an alternate component set and use a trigger line to turn on and off that particular shoulder. So what I want to do is show you how you could accomplish that. So first thing I'm going to do is copy this, and then I'll paste it. I'll paste it back in this linear template folder. And now I've got another copy of it, and if you see, I've got this shoulder 1. I'm just going to rename this a shoulder, paved shoulder end condition, because that's what we're going to use it as. Like that. Whoops, let me just use capital letters in condition so I can kind of see it. Now I'm going to make this active. And so now I have a shoulder condition here, and let's say I needed to put in a ditch, and so I could go ahead and I showed you how you could create new components here, or I could use the end condition parts, and I could put in a 4:1 fill, 4:1 fill here. I could drag that to here, and then I could put a 4:1 cut, and once Once I have this, I could basically draw it in here. And now I've got a ditch, and if I didn't like the depth of this, I could change it. Instead of being 40 feet, it's only supposed to be 10 feet. And apply that. And then the same thing with this other point. I just wanted it to project a surface instead of sloping or at a horizontal distance. I could set this to, say, 10 feet. And there's lots of ways you can control this. So this would basically build a 10-foot or whatever, a 2.5-foot ditch below the paved shoulder point. Now, if I wanted to control this a little differently, you can go ahead and do like a slope from a point and control it that way. If I wanted to always make sure this was a 2.5-foot ditch deep and then tie to the existing ground, I could just change this to, instead of a horizontal, it could just be project a surface here. And if I apply, then wherever the ground is, this slope is going to stop. Now, it wouldn't solve if the ground was below this 2.5-foot 2.5-foot deep ditch, I guess is what I was trying to say. So let's just go ahead with this and say that this is going to be the other end condition set that we want to build. Now, in order to make this whole thing turn on and turn off, we have to add what we call a trigger line. And we have added a standard trigger line in the template library. So let me go back to the template library organizer, and I'll look in our FDOT template library. And here's the FDOT template library. And I'll go to the end conditions, and we have a standard trigger line here. And if I open up my end conditions folder over here, I can just drag it from one side to the other. And now I have a trigger line, and I'll just choose OK here. And now let me go back to those linear templates and the paved shoulder EC. And if I open up this one, I can drag in this trigger line. And all I'd have to do, you see where I'm dragging it from. I want to maybe put it at this elevation 3, so I'll just drag it right here, and I'll just place it right here. Now, for those of you paying attention, you probably are wondering why I did or did not use the affixes. Now, whenever this is one of the things, whenever you're adding things or building templates, you always want to make sure you load up your preferences, and then you want to pay attention to whether or not you're adding affixes to it. In this case, I knew I wasn't going to add affixes because this is going to be a generic one that I'm going to add to another template. So that's what I recommend, and that was part of what that slide said, is that you build your end condition component sets in separate templates. And then when you want to add them to your main template, you can. But we're not finished quite building this yet. So, see I have this trigger line, and right now it's just looking for a feature horizontal, and it's the first one in the list. In this case, what I want to look for is a paved, shoulder paved rather. So I want to look for shoulder paved proposed, or this shoulder paved right here. And that's going to be what turns this thing on. So whenever I have that, it will basically solve itself, because that's essentially what it is. And then if I look at it to see if there's any rules on it, what I'm going to do is just add a rule here that says, and it's already got the rule associated with it. That's another nice thing. All we've got to do now is just change the name of it. So I'm just going to call it SHLD underbar paved, and then that's looking for a shoulder paved. So what this really does is it's an end condition that's looking for a target, and the target is a shoulder paved line that you could add to the corridor. And if it finds a shoulder paved line, then it basically becomes true and it would solve itself. And then in order to have all of this trigger on, what we do is we add the parent-child relationships to everything. So I would make sure that first I would make sure that this line is a child of this line and choose apply. And then I would look at this line and make sure it's a child of the unpaved shoulder and choose apply. And then I would look at the unpaved shoulder and make sure that it's a child of the shoulder paved out and choose apply. And then I think from there on everything should have a relationship, but all I have to do to check it is to come over here and look and see that the shoulder paved out now is not in the paved shoulder out point, which is this whole paved shoulder. I didn't even need this. This is actual pavement. So let me delete this also. And then I'm going to set this as the template origin. So whenever I delete out a component, in this case it was the pavement, and I want to essentially make this the 0 point, I can just do a change template origin and it moves everything over there. And then I'm going to make sure this trigger line is always basically constrained horizontally from this point that I'm trying to build anyway. So what I can do is just choose add constraint and then go to full constraint and pick this point, and now I'm going to override this horizontal offset and set the actual physical vertical offset to 3. And now I've got and there's a display issue with this thing. Notice when I'm zoomed in I get duplicates here. I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but if you zoom out they go away. Alright, so then I'm going to go back to my template library here, and you see that I've got the shoulder paved is independent from the search line, so all I've got to do is double click on this shoulder paved out, and it has all the other components under it, and then I'll just make it a child of this search line. Okay, so that's basically just setting up all these components to be a child of this line, and I did it as a chained relationship through here. And so now if I go to the test, you'll see that I've got this shoulder paved as an active available target, and if I draw it, it's going to automatically draw in the shoulder. And the reason that I don't get the ditch yet is because that is a project to surface. So the ditch isn't going to show up until I actually draw that in there. And let me just take this project to surface off. I don't think I gave it a surface, whatever the active surface is here. And if you test it now, this has got to be active, and then it should draw in that line. So I'm still missing something here. Just for the sake of it, without having to troubleshoot, I'm just going to set this back to a horizontal from this point and choose apply, close, so that everything should turn on if I just draw this here. Okay, so these should not be. And then this should not be any of this. So these are then normal components. Whenever you pull from the end conditions folder, those are actually end conditions. I could have also just placed a simple line in here. So let's see. Still has got that. So now I'm actually drawing that in there. And then this should actually then well, at any rate, I'm not concerned about tying it into the ground at this point. What I'm really trying to show you is how you can build a component set that works off of a trigger line. And then once you have that, what you can do is come over here and you can drag that component set into your template here in this case. All right. So what I would do is then drag in this shoulder set, and I would choose to reflect it. And then I'm going to basically just place it, I'm just going to eyeball it right here for now. And then once I have it in there, what I'll do is I'll right click, just like we did with the median conditions. Now I'm going to essentially attach it to this point with a vertical offset. So I'm going to add a full constraint to this point right here, because that's where I actually want to start the shoulder. And I'll set the horizontal offset to 0 and set a 10-foot vertical and choose OK. Now this point here should have had a another type of constraint there. So just do Control-Z, and I'll just set this before I move it. So it should have been, let's just say it should have been a slope from this point right here. And then close, so that now when I move this, that's another reason why we say to have all green points on templates, so that when you do these dynamic or these moves and things like that, and adding constraints, that everything moves together. So I'm going to click to here, 0 and 10, and it should look better. All right. Now that I have it there, the next thing we need to do is set this label that we have in this template to be this vertical offset label that we applied in the last session for basically putting these down in the median. Then the other thing we need to do is figure out, because right now this set is going to turn on, and if it sees a shoulder paved, it's also going to be turned on. So what we've got to do is turn off this set. So there's a couple of ways to do that. You could basically make sure that these are in a relationship to everything here, so that like if I look at this particular one, make it a child of the buffer. Do the same thing here, make it a child of the buffer, and then look at the buffer and make it a child of the sidewalk, and then look at the sidewalk and make it a child of this curb. Choose apply, and if I go and look in my active template now, I should have for this left curb here, let's see, where did it go? Left curb type, here it is. So this left curb type F should have, must not have got that. Must not have chose apply. So now this has the sidewalk, the buffer, and the only thing it doesn't have is this extra information, and that is a left handrail test. So I want to make that also a child of the sidewalk. And so now if one way you can test these things is if you choose the curb and just right click and uncheck the display, you notice how everything goes away. So that's how I know I have the relationship built in there. And then I would also probably take this one and make it also a child of the curb. You're not going to have a curb base unless you have a curb. So. And once I have that, then I can come over on this component here. And remember, this is going to turn on whenever this solves. So what I can do is apply the opposite for this curb here. So what I would do is come into this curb right here and go into the rules. And I have this search for this shoulder paved here. And for some reason, I guess it didn't take the name. So what I would do is just add this as a selected rule and choose not in front of it. And that will basically turn it off because this line exists in the template. So as soon as I choose apply and close, now if I go to what a normal display would be, you would see that none of that is actually in there. And these are some miscellaneous points that I'll just leave in there for now. I would really delete them in my template. But so what this is showing now is that in this test scenario, and I have some conflicts here, notice that the curb and gutter is normally displayed, but if I had a shoulder paved and drew it across here, now you see that this shoulder paved gets displayed instead. So you're not usually going to have a curb line and a shoulder line along the edge of your pavement. You're going to have one or the other. So if there's no shoulder line, then the curb's going to display, and vice versa. So that's how you can add that in there. And then if you look at applying it on your template, you do a file save here, and then I close out, you'll see that I've got this type of situation here where actually this curb and sidewalk goes all the way through this. I'm kind of looking at this this intersection right here where this traffic separator is around this curve, and you notice that my corridor stops here. And I do have a shoulder situation over here. So all I'd have to do then is to select, well, first of all, I'd have to resynchronize the template and pick the template drop, and it will go ahead and reprocess. But notice that the shoulder line doesn't appear yet, and the reason for that is because this shoulder line hasn't been added to the corridor as a reference, and some of you probably already picked that up. So just give it a second. I think I am in a design mode, and as soon as it finishes displaying here, I'll go ahead and add that as a corridor reference, and it will and then we'll let it process again. But before I do that, because just the time it takes to process, I'll go ahead and change this from a preliminary to a from a design to a preliminary stage, just to make it go a little smoother, a little faster rather. So this is what we're talking about here by adding special end conditions in separate templates. Looks like it did. So then I'm going to select this line, and I'm going to use the add corridor reference, and I'll select this corridor and data point. And as soon as it processes, I should get a shoulder on the other side of that intersection, if everything was applied correctly. And there you see now I have basically changed in one template the end condition associated off of that template, off of the end of the edge of pavement there. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to actually come out and use the linear template on a 3D reference line, which is more like 3D modeling. It's more the 3D modeling tool, and by doing that I would use what's called a linear template. And now I would just come over to this linear template, and I would need to select the element to apply the template to. So I would select the edge of pavement element over here. Well, first it wants to know what template I'm going to use. And if I alt down, or just pick this right here, I'll pick this paved shoulder end condition here. And then it wants to know the element. And since there's no profile on this element, I can pick this element out here in the 3D view, and that has got a profile associated with it. And then I'll select the template, and then I'm going to give it a range. Right now it's locked here, so I'm going to lock these. And I'm going to essentially start it at where the shoulder point starts, and then basically to the end of the corridor right there. And then the reflect option here should be out. There it goes. So I'm going to set it there and an exterior angle, and trying to see if it actually did it there. Well, let's delete this. This is getting into some of the 3D modeling stuff that basically, let's see if I go to hit the template drop. Oh, well, of course, this is going to need to have the corridor reference as well. Somebody already thought of that in order for it to turn on. So I'm going to locate the corridor. Well, actually, I think it has more to do with the fact that this line needs to have a profile on it. And that's just another way of doing it. Get this view to open up here. Seems to be slow. Okay. And then essentially I would use this 3D geometry tool rather here, vertical geometry tool. And I would use this profile by 3D element. And then I would select the element to profile, which is this edge of pavement line right here. And then I would select the 3D line that represented that profile. And it'll take a second here to process again. And I should see a profile display in here. This is a pretty detailed corridor at this point. So there's my new profile line. And if I just select this line, make sure it's the active profile, then I can, I'd like to be able to delete this template drop if I could, but looks like it's part of its own. Let's go over into here, find these linear templates in the model. Look for all those see, I've got those corridors. Usually there's another option in here for the linear templates, which I'm not seeing. So let me just try to place that again now on this line as a linear template. Then I would add the reference to this corridor, and I would pick this shoulder line, reset. Okay. So, not sure why I wasn't getting that linear template to work. I mean, I've got linear templates throughout here that work, you know, and everything. So, apologize for that. Let me move on to the slide again and talk about the next particular item, and that is adding intersection behavior controls. What I mean by that is, you know, a lot of times when you go through an intersection, you don't necessarily want to have all your curb and gutter and everything like that shown in here. So there's a few different ways to do it, but you know, one of the ways to do it is adding what's called a switch in your template, and that would be to basically just turn off everything if a certain condition happens. A switch is nothing more than another end condition type, and if you go into the template library, I'm trying to see if I actually created it. Yeah, this switch is actually delivered in the DOT template library as well, and that is located in the oops, open here in the components folders, I believe is where we put it. So it's in this null folder, and there's a switches, and what that does, it allows you to basically set values, and it has rules for each one of them. So let me show you how that one works. So what I could do then is add in the switches to my template here, and by doing that I'll just basically drag this in here like this, and now I have a left and Control Z. I want to make sure I don't have the affixes turned on in this case, and drag it again. Alright, so now I have these switches, and these switches have rules associated with them. So a left switch equal 1 is one particular rule or one particular situation, and then there's essentially a label that goes with this switch, and the label is what we can use for, it's called left switch, and that's the label. So that's how we can basically make things do things. So for example, if I wanted to also put on this this curb and gutter here, instead of being this not search rule, I'll change this, I'll delete this, and I'll say that whenever this left switch value equals 5, then or equals 1, let's see, what I want to do is actually turn it off. So I'm going to say that not when this switch value equals 5, and essentially right now it's not 5, so it wouldn't be on. Or if I set this to, you turn this off, set the switch value to be true equals, then that would make that false. And if I hit apply and close, now the switch value in this template right now is set to 1, I believe. In other words, the distance between it is 1.5, so it's not 5. So I choose apply and close here, and then if I synchronize this template so that it takes on the switches and let it process again. Another way that we've done this is we've we could put a line across here, and notice now that the nothing is turned on here. So obviously I need to put that value in there. So I would come over to the parametric constraints, and I may have this backwards, but I'm just going to Alt to lock to the beginning and Alt to lock to the end. And then I'm going to look for the switch value here, and I could pick it from this list, which should be now the left switch. And right now it's set to 1.5. If I set it to 5, and 5, it should turn that curb and sidewalk back on. And I'm gonna just sort of back up and make sure that I've got this. So let's see here. So when it's 5, it should turn on, and when it's not 5, it should turn off. So basically what I'm trying to show is that if you go in and set your value, if you go ahead and set a switch to a particular value, you can turn on and off different things. And we basically have provided with you, up to 8, well, actually 10 switches, 5 on each side. So instead of using this trigger line, you could use a switch value and say that whenever this switch value is a particular number, then this particular situation would turn on. And then you could use switches on along your corridor to turn on and off different things. Now, I'm not sure why I'm not getting everything working here this morning, but that's all right. You kind of mainly it's the concept, and if you decide you want to use any of these concepts and you're having trouble getting it to work, feel free to give me a call, or one of us here actually, and we can work through the details and get them all working with you. So the next one, I want to just keep moving on here. I'm sorry that not all these are working the way they should be, but the next one I want to cover was the and I'll just go through here. Let's see, it's the add crossover behavior controls. And what I mean by that is, in our corridor here, you see that I have this traffic separator. And if I if you look at the way the lines are being created here, you can't necessarily see them in here, but you can. Let me get rid of this profile view. You can see it in here that this is a pavement component, which is part of the template. Then this is the left turn, and then this is the extra component for where it transitions from the curb to the traffic separator, which is pavement. And then on the other side you have the same thing. And what these correspond to are the points, are these components in our template. So if I turn off all these point names so you can see, you'll see that this first segment was this pavement here. And then in a traffic separator type component, you have what is the left turn lane, which is shown as really small here, but obviously if we did a test horizontal point controls, you see that it actually moves. It moves this whole thing, and it actually moves and it widens that traffic separator that way. And then the last little bit is the 2 points that line up with the points on the curb, which is these 2 points right here. So that's why you're seeing in the model those 3 different pavement segments, okay? So that's why, as you know, it continues along this same slope. So if it's super elevated, it'll continue up. But what you'll end up getting is a sloped pavement up to this edge of traffic separator, and this traffic separator is no longer at the same elevation. It has to be elevated a little bit in order for it to meet this pavement. And then on the other side here, where you've got a crossover condition, in our template, the crossover condition is set to slope. We turn off some of these construction lines. And, well, actually, it's okay. So now if I rotate around, you'll see that what I'm talking about as far as these intersection controls. So see how this pavement here goes up, and then it goes up to meet where the traffic separator is supposed to be. And then whenever there's not a traffic separator, it goes to a normal crown situation. So we've got to be able to account for this in this crossover behavior. And you can do that in your template, okay? And normally, or I guess the way I've been modeling it is that there should be some type of rollover line in here that takes it from this, so that the crossover comes up to meet that line and then eventually comes back to wherever the normal crown would be, okay, or where the normal edge would be. So what I've done is, in the plan view, I've come out here and I've added these two what are called slope break lines, because on the other side here my template's going to be balanced. It's basically going to be crowned about my center point. So what I want to do is essentially take those two edges and at least transition this 2% slope, which is in here, to this line until it meets here. And then the same thing with this one, I want to transition it to this point right here. And so what we provided in the templates in the crossover median, if you looked at the median conditions in our components, and I don't know if I didn't bring them over, but there is a folder in our template library called median conditions, and one of them is this crossover component. And this crossover component now has, if you just look at the way it comes across, and I had modified this, if you look at the way it actually comes across in our template library, it looks like this. And this, imagine this without the joined pavements. And what you'll see now are these two new crossover points in here, and then there's a crowned point here. So it comes over as though you would have a normal crowned median. Now, in order to modify your template so that it will handle that smooth sort of crossover whenever you have traffic separators on either side, what you would do is go in and add a point control to these points here, and then you would need to modify this crown point, which is set to currently slope, to be the same slope between these 2 points and halfway between them, so that as this line moves over to meet whatever that slope break line is, then this crown would be in the middle and it would end up being halfway in the slope there. And so what I did was I actually set that up so that if you look at the crown median in this case, it's no longer particularly crowned, and because my intersection isn't going to be. And now the way it works is, if you test this horizontal line, you'll see that as this left turn lane kind of tapers out, it's going to move itself back, all right, to a normal crown situation. And then when it's up here in the traffic separator, it's basically going to meet the pavement of where the traffic separator is. So the only other thing we need to do then is notice that it's sitting here crowned and it's using that template. So we just need to add these as reference lines or pavement slope references for that particular template. So I'm going to locate the corridor here. I'm going to select these two lines, and they were drawn in as pavement slope breaks. And then I'll reset, and it should process. We may have to set it to the design stage in order for it to use the external references once it's done processing. But you'll see that then basically the crossover will behave like the traffic separator as far as sloping up. And see there, now you see if I select this pavement here, it's now transitioning up, and then it's going to come back to a normal crown situation at this location 100 feet away. And all I did was add these lines in here. If you look at them, the properties of them, it's just a pavement slope break feature. and that corresponds with the point on the template that's looking for, again, this point right here is looking for a pavement slope break, and it's set to look across the median for that. And then that will control the crossover in that situation where you have to go from one traffic separator to a normal crown. Now, if you had a traffic separator on the other side, you know, opposite this intersection, what you would do is, instead of having these lines go to the crown, you would basically have them go to the other two sides of that. Okay. Now, let's see how we're doing on time. About 20 minutes. Now, let me just talk about horizontal feature controls and ranges. Now, I've got, let's see, this is a existing baseline. I'm going to turn this off, this line right here, so that we can see how we're going to transition this roadway back into the existing. And I believe there's also a milling limit here. All right, well, it's not. It's actually in a reference file. If I turn on this topo file, you'll see that what we're really doing is we're transitioning back to the existing roadway, and we're trying to tie into the shoulders. So in order to do that, I'm going to use another template that's part of this corridor. So I want to go into my corridors, and then I'll show you how I can actually make those horizontal ranges work. So I'm going to go over to the template library, and I don't have a template for this, but I know it's a 2-lane divided, so I'll go into the FDOT template library and find just a static typical, which is a rural 2-lane 2-way, just like that. And I'm going to put this over in the components folder. And I'm going to be careful when I drag so I don't touch any of those folders. And put it right there. Choose OK. Now I've got that. And if I can, into my template library, you see I now have this typical 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it. I'm going to put it in my corridor and paste it here. I'm going to rename this SR61, and then I'll put underbar whatever, rural or tie point or 2. I'll just put 2 for the second part for now. And then I could version these 2.1, 2.2, so on and so forth. And once I have that, I'll double click on it and look at it. So now let's take a look at this. I'll turn off these point names just so they're not in the way. You'll see that this is a 12-foot lane, and it has this edge of pavement style constraint on it, or a horizontal feature constraint, and it's set to a range of -50. So I know this is actually going to work on my corridor because, first of all, it's at 12 feet, and I don't get any smaller than 12 feet. If this existing roadway was 11 feet, then my corridor would stop at 12 feet, just because of the way that the override is. So what this is really saying is that this horizontal pavement width is going to be 12 feet unless it finds unless a corridor reference has been added, which is this pavement asphalt. And if that has been added, then it will override this width to the width of the line, provided that it's from this location and 50 feet to the left of it. If that line somehow is drawn inside of 12 feet, it's going to default to this particular width because my range isn't particularly right. If that was the situation, let's say that I needed to come down to at least 10 feet, or let's say it was an odd number, 9.69, all I'd have to do is set this horizontal width to be -9, just something inside of where that line is, and then this override would know to go from 9 to 59, and then it would actually hit it. And that's what these ranges are basically. That's what I mean by you want to check and make sure you got the ranges. So let's just set this way. I'll choose apply, and now you'll see that moves it in. And then I'm going to close, and I'm going to use this underbar 2 template on my corridor. So then I'll come over to my corridor objects. I'll select this corridor, and it's going to open up with the not that corridor. I want to select this corridor here. And do that again. Corridor objects, this corridor. And it has the template drops that I have. So I'm going to go ahead and add one. And then it's looking for the template. So I'm going to Alt down and pick this underbar 2 template. Choose OK. And then I'll start it at the end of this corridor here. And I'll just eyeball it for now. And I'm going to end it. I can hit the Alt key to end it to the end. And a drop interval of 10. And a minimum transition drop of 0 and 0 for the after. And it will extend my corridor in my model. And we can check out the ranges to see if they actually worked. Looks like that template drop, that linear template actually worked down here. I just hadn't clipped out the other version of it. I wasn't seeing that. And I haven't looked at any of the questions or the comments. I'm sure some of you probably found some of that, but that's great. I'm glad it's sometimes easier to kind of watch what's going on and see my mistakes than it is when you're actually pushing the buttons. So now you see that I've got this, and notice that this side here is definitely not hitting that edge of pavement. And it's either because this isn't a corridor reference, actually it is, or because the reference distance, the range, isn't far enough. Okay, so what I would want to do is try to figure out what is this width here. So I can measure it, and I can essentially just go from here to whatever this width is, and it's probably, all right, somewhere around 36 feet. And so then I would need to go back to my template and look at this point right here, and it says that it's 50 and it's edge of pavement asphalt. It could be that it isn't small enough to start the range. Let's try that first. Close. And then I want to synchronize that template right here. Notice the other side actually hit it. I can kind of tell because of the way the line is parallel. The corridor boundary line is parallel to it, where this one isn't. So that reference line was not being added, or wasn't being included. The other thing you can do to troubleshoot these things, and this is all part of testing these ranges, is to drop the reference and add it back in there. It's not as easy in SS3 to see these as it was in the Roadway Designer, and see, just by doing that it sort of fixed that. So now, actually no, it didn't. So what I would probably want to do is come in here. It says it's referenced by that corridor, but it's obviously not working. So I'm going to subtract it from this corridor and then pick this line and reset it. And once it finishes processing here, I'll add it again, and then it will process it again. And let's add it back to the corridor. The thing I want to make sure there isn't two lines here. Yeah, that's what I was not sure why there was two lines there. I guess one is an interval, so I'm going to add that one. Reset. Well, again, I would have to troubleshoot this to see why. Sometimes, believe it or not, sometimes if you just take this thing off and reinitiate it, close, and I can't remember if I resynchronized that or not, but you just select this again, let it reprocess. while it's doing that, let me look at the question log here and see if there's anything that I can start answering. It isn't somebody trying to help me, I guess. It looks like most people have gotten answers. No. Now, believe it or not, if you just sometimes check it back on and go pick the horizontal feature that you're trying to target, this pavement asphalt, and set the range again to 50 feet. And I'll just to make sure it's different, I'm going to set it to 55, choose apply, and make sure that that's set again. Okay, close out, and this will be the last attempt I make to troubleshoot this, and then we're going to move on. Let's see, how would you create a template that you could use for A-cell, D-cell auxiliary lanes with a different cross slope at a ramp terminal without creating a separate template without the auxiliary lane? Again, I think I sort of talked about this last week, where you can add in a pavement segment that it's sloped at whatever that cross slope is, and then zero it out and have it look for a particular target or horizontal feature and only widen when it finds that feature. So that's how you would probably handle that. What are the switches following? When I was adding switches, what they basically do is it's a line between 2 points, and what you can do is put a rule on the line, or actually a rule between the points, that says if the distance between them is 1, then it's true. If the distance between them is 2, then it's true. And you can have separate rules for the different distances. And then because you have that, if you set actually a horizontal distance label that follows that, or that controls what that width is, then you can essentially use those rules with the different values to do different things. So 1 could be turn off the outside curb and sidewalk when you get through an intersection. 2 turns on shoulders, and 3 does something else, turns on maybe a shared use path along the right of way. And all of those can be in your template and controlled by numbers. The drawback, or the thing that you have to remember, is that first of all, you have to remember what number goes with which condition, and 2, you have to manually go in and assign the station limits of those switch numbers along your corridor. It can be clean, but you got to the maintenance then is going to be in the parametric constraints. The other thing is, if you have trigger lines, then trigger lines need to have lines or things that turn them on and off. When you have switches, it doesn't matter. You can just turn on and off things as you will, based on the number and the actual parametric constraint station range. Because if you look at the parametric constraints, well, I can't look at it here, but let's see if I look at the corridor objects on here and look at the parametric constraints. See, I have this vertical offset switch that's set to 0. That's what puts everything down at, so that everything ties together. And then I was using this left switch, and I was setting the value to a value to turn on and off the intersection, was what I was attempting to do. So that's another way of controlling your outside end conditions. Another thing that I did is actually use the trigger line to basically draw in the shoulder and the ditch. And I had to make sure that I added this to my corridor. And because of the way my template was set up right here, this only works off of when this is true, okay? So with these switches, it's the same thing, only we're using a parametric constraint to control what the width of these are to make them true, so to speak. All right. So I know it gets complex, but it's really powerful once you've got a good understanding of it. and you've done the testing to make it work. And then, like I said, in SS3, it can be just as simple. Instead of doing all this extra stuff in your template, you can just come in here and you can use a linear template like I did. I guess it's right here. There's actually a ditch in here somewhere. I thought I saw one, but I'm not seeing it now. And it may be there, I don't know. But once you have basically put another linear template in here, you could essentially run your template without a end condition on the outside, and then use these linear templates to basically place whatever you want, and you would just have to put them along your corridor as they apply. So, you know, there's three or four different ways of doing it. So trigger lines are more for an automated way to control the display of components, and switches are a manual way to control the display of control. Yep, exactly, Jeremy. That's basically what I just reiterated. For the transition from traffic separator to median openings, what were the median crown point constraints? Okay, the way those were set up is, I'll cover those again. For this situation where you're going to try to control this crossover, this pavement crown needs to be set as such. First of all, you need to make sure that it's going to be constrained from one side only, where before it was sloped from this point and from this point. What you're going to do is set them both to this side, and then you're going to go into the slope, and you're going to say that it's actually going to be whatever the slope between this point and this point is. So it doesn't matter if this line moves over, that's the slope. If this line moves over, that's the slope. And this pavement crown basically has to stay in there. It could also be called a vector offset between 2 points, but I just used an equation. And I set the multiplier to 1, which basically gave it that value. So wherever that line moves, that pavement crown is going to stay at the slope between those 2 points. And this has to go up at a 2%. That has to go up at 2%. And then in order to keep it in the middle, I did the same thing. I said horizontally, I want this pavement crown point to be in the middle of these two, and I used an equation to do that, and all I said is that between the left and the right, halfway between, and it calculates what that value needs to be. And that's how you can control if this were to slide up because it had to move up to that line that you were adding in there to control the crossover. It stays in the middle and it stays at the slope. So that was a good question. What did you use for a target? What did you use for a target for your trigger line end conditions set directly to the specific feature? I think for what he's asking, then the only linear template, or I guess for a trigger line end condition, yeah. So what I used was, there's two different ways of doing this. Good question, Mark. And that is, when you place these trigger lines in here, you have the option to set the target a few different ways. So you can either use a linear, well, lots of different ways actually. I use the feature definition horizontal, and by doing that I can use whatever the feature tag is on that line. If you were to use a linear horizontal, you could actually key in the exact name of the line that you're going to use. And where does that line name come from? Well, it actually comes from, in your plan view, this line right here. If you go to properties, when you set feature on it, you're going to give it a name. So in this case, it's called pave shoulder, P shoulder 6. So I could have, instead of using the feature name, this feature name shoulder pave or pave shoulder, that right there, in my template, I could have set that to be, when it's triggering on, I could have set it, instead of shoulder pave P shoulder, I could have set it to a linear horizontal and called this SHLD 6 specifically, and then it would be very specific to use just that line. But because my template needs to be generic, or like when I built it over here, I wanted it to be a generic. Whenever it finds a paved shoulder or shoulder paved line feature, then it would turn on. So that's a good question. There's two different ways of doing that same thing. All right, so let's see here. Let me go back to the PowerPoint real quick and cover this. So what we really kind of did this morning was to cover these sort of things here, which are really detailed template, adding special end conditions on templates, intersection behaviors, crossover behaviors, checking this point properties, horizontal feature controls, and the ranges, which I didn't do successfully. Let's see, there were some other things. These that are in blue, we'll be having a detailed modeling webinar, I think in 2 or 3 weeks. And I'm going to cover how to add these things into your model using civil cells, actually. And using linear templates, a combination of linear templates and civil cells and all these other different things that basically will build the model, these sort of things. So if you could just hang tight. I've already got a traffic separator nose in here, and this is actually a civil cell. It's a civil cell built from a linear template is what it really is. Okay, so someone's knocking at my door. I guess that means that I need to wrap up here. So I appreciate all your comments and questions, and thank you for attending. We'll go ahead and shut the webinar down, and look forward to next week.